Hello everyone, and welcome to a reading of Chapter 6 of Elements of Bree. Chapter 6, The Tunnel to Gole. Bree slept in the next morning. When she finally got out for bed, she went and had a shower. She found herself lost in thought about Gole, who she was, and what she was expected to do. After standing under the hot shower for a while, she finished washing and dried off. As she was getting dressed, the smell of bacon and coffee came from the kitchen downstairs. It was a weekday, so it seemed out of place for her aunt to make a special breakfast. Once she was dressed, she came downstairs and was surprised at the feast her aunt had made. There was bacon, scrambled eggs, oatmeal, toast, cut fruit, juice, and coffee. Bree stood in the entranceway to the kitchen, looking shocked. "Now come on, love," Aunt Margaret said, pouring 2 mugs of coffee. "Have a seat and start eating. I made your favorites. I even put cheese into the eggs." Bree sat across from her. "Why all this food?" "You're going to need your energy for the journey ahead, and breakfast is the most important meal of the day, so I'm starting you off right." Bree didn't know what to say, but her aunt didn't give her a chance to think of anything as she pointed to the counter. "I also made you a few meals to take with you into Gole. There are only sandwiches, some granola bars, and a few trail mixes, but they should do you well enough." Bree stared at her aunt, watching her eat. After a few moments, her aunt looked at her. "What?" she asked. "You're not hungry?" "No, I am," Bree answered. "You seem so okay with me leaving to Gole, like you really think I'm going to do it. Aren't you?" Bree sighed and then chuckled to herself. "Yes, I guess I am. It just feels strange to be so comfortable with this." Her aunt nodded. "I know how you feel. I can't believe how easy it is for me to let you go back." They smiled at each other and then began eating the breakfast feast. As they ate, they joked about life in Passerelle, shared stories about living there, and laughed at warm memories. She barely touched the coffee, as she was never a fan of the bitter drink. Bree helped clean up after and then went back to pack a bag for her journey. She took a few changes of clothes, the scroll, her slingshot, and a notepad and pencil. The last thing she packed was Blaze, making sure his dusty and scarred head stuck out of the backpack. She came downstairs and packed the food her aunt had made and went to the door. Her aunt stood there with a couple of flashlights in one hand and holding out the necklace and charm with the other. "This is yours now," she said. Bree took the necklace and placed it around her neck, tucking the pendant inside her jacket. Without saying another word, she followed her aunt out of the house and into the car. The drive to Miners Point took about 15 minutes. Not much was said between the two, other than commenting on the boats out in the bay or pointing out who was out in the yard doing work. Once they arrived, Aunt Margaret parked the car along the fence of a house that had been abandoned for many years. Ahead of them was the beginning of a path most people used for off-road vehicles or quads. Bree gathered her backpack and began the hike with her aunt. The walk took another 10 minutes to get to the shoreline. It was treacherous in some areas due to the drop-off to the bay on the west side of Miners Point, or the ocean on the east side. They left the path after it curved and began hiking up the rocky ridge to the actual location of the cave. They saw a deer grazing in the entrance, but it took off as it got closer. "This brings back a lot of memories for me," Aunt Margaret commented. "Things sure look different." "Have you not been out here since you found me?" Her aunt stopped walking and looked around again. "Only once, for the traps, but never to the cave again." She pointed to the high ridge in front of them. "That's where the cave is." They approached the cliff face that had held the gaping hole near the base. As they got closer, Bree could see the entrance was only 4 feet high. "Is this a bear cave?" she asked. Her aunt crouched down and turned on her flashlight, lighting up the inside. "I think it used to be, but there haven't been any bears around here for years," she replied. "Many years before I was born, it used to be an old silver mine run by the locals in Passerelle. They didn't find enough to keep it open, so they left it." Staying hunched over, Aunt Margaret hobbled into the cave. Bree followed close behind for a short distance until they could stand up straight. They're in a small chamber of the cave, no bigger than a one-car garage. "This is where I found you," Aunt Margaret said, aiming her flashlight beam at a space on the floor. "And this chamber is where I killed those little elf creatures." Bree walked to the far end and ran her hand along it. "Are we under Miner's Rock?" Aunt Margaret nodded. "And that's where those elves came from." Bree looked to see her aunt gesture to the wall. "They came from the wall?" Her aunt shrugged. "As far as I can guess. One second there was just you, Blaze, and a scroll, and the next second they were coming after me and I tried to take you out. The only exit's the way we came, so that rock is solid, and I have no answers for you on that. Bree had continued to run her hand along the wall and was watching her aunt as she spoke, when suddenly she felt an indent. She looked to see a shape carved into the rock. It took a moment, but she finally recognized it as the outline of the pendant on her necklace. The symbol that is like the charm. She stepped back and pulled the charm out, looking at the dark jewels in the center. She looked from the pendant to the indent in the wall a few times, and then made a decision. She placed the charm into the outline of the cave wall. There was a rumbling, and then the wall seemed to melt. A circular outline appeared, and all the rock within that circle melted into the middle. What was now before Bree and her aunt was a tunnel with a light at the end. The walls of the tunnel were a soft purple and were waving as if they were underwater. There was a soft whooshing sound as if the air in the room were being sucked into the tunnel, but neither Bree or her aunt could feel a breeze. Bree took a step toward the middle of the tunnel opening, pulling the charm from the indent in the wall beside it. She stared down the tunnel, and it felt warm. It felt warmth to her, comfort, and she needed to go down it. She turned to her aunt and smiled. "I need to go," she said confidently. Aunt Margaret nodded and came close to her. "I know you do, Bree." They hugged for longer than usual and then pulled away and looked at each other. Neither of them were crying. "I don't feel sad about leaving," Bree commented. "Why?" "Because you know where you need to go. Home," her Aunt Margaret replied. "I'm worried about you." "Go on," her aunt said with a chuckle. "I've survived many years after my husband died, and before I found you all on my own. You know I'll be fine." Bree nodded. Aunt Margaret leaned in and kissed her forehead. "But I'll miss you terribly." "So will I." "You and Blaze take care of each other in Gole. Save your land and make me proud." Bree nodded and turned to face the tunnel again. She placed the necklace and charm around her neck and took a step forward. She stopped and looked over her shoulder. "Will I ever see you again?" Aunt Margaret smiled. "If I know anything about you, Bree of Gole, you'll find a way to see me again. Be safe." Bree turned back to the tunnel and walked down it. Once she was halfway, the light at the end surrounded her, and the rock began to reform on the cave wall. There was a loud rumble as the cave returned to normal, leaving Aunt Margaret by herself, her flashlight shining where the tunnel entrance used to be. Bree was gone. What's going to happen next? Stay tuned.